Good morning, kids. Mrs. Banks here. It is day 3 of being at home. We're going to read the next couple chapters of the book, The Wild Robot Escapes. If you remember correctly, yesterday we found out that Roz has been relocated to a farm. So a couple questions that I have. Does Roz remember Bright Bill? We don't know that yet. Can Roz still speak with the animals? We don't know that yet. Will the family like her? We aren't sure. And at the end, we will have a question for you. I'm going to tell you the question now, so you can be thinking about it while I read. The question is, how do you think Roz feels being in a new place? And why do you think that? So we'll start with chapter 5. Chapter 5. The farm. Mr. Sharif turned and shouted, "Come here, Rambler!" A moment later, a pickup truck automatically rolled out from the garage. The truck pulled up to the man and the robot. Its doors opened wide, and they both climbed in. Rambler had a steering wheel, but Mr. Sharif sat back and let the truck drive itself. They followed the driveway, behind the house, across the backyard, past the trees and hedges, and suddenly they were surrounded by farm buildings. The buildings were different sizes and shapes, all white walls with gray roofs, and they were so tightly packed together that you could hardly tell where one building ended and the next began. Some were spattered with mud. Others had holes and loose boards. The entire place smelled like grass and manure. Mr. Sharif pointed out each building to Roz. There was an enormous dairy barn, the milking parlor, the workshop, the machine shed. Smaller sheds were scattered all around. Rambler drove out from the buildings and down the back side of the hill into a wide sweep of farmland. A fence lined its part of the driveway, and behind the fence was a sprawling, rolling pasture, lush with tall grass and a few leafy trees where a herd of cows were grazing. The cows swished their tails and chewed their cud and followed the truck with their eyes. One of them let out a long moo. "This is the dairy farm," said Mr. Sharif. "So these cows are the queens around here. Your whole world now revolves around them. Understand?" "I understand," said Roz, as she stared at the young calf who was staring right back at her. They rolled past a herd of cows, past clumps of wildflowers, past a quiet pond, past birds and field mice and bumblebees. The driveway cut through the rows of trees on its way out to the crop fields, which were flat and square and covered with bright green sprouts. Hilltop Farm was bursting with life, but it had seen better days. Patches of weeds and bare dirt were spreading across the fields. Broken down farm machines and piles of junk were strewn across the grounds. Thick tangles of brush were creeping in from the edges of the property. They drove all the way out to the furthest fields, to a little roundabout at the very end of the driveway. Rambler shut off its engine, and the man and the robot sat and looked at the countryside. Far off, where the land met the sky, a train quietly slid along its tracks and disappeared to the north. Then all was still. "This farm needs help," said Mr. Sharif at last. "It's been in my family for generations, and I don't want to lose it. But I can't do farm work anymore, not with this bad leg. That's why you're here. They said Roz and robots can learn and do almost every kind of job, and you'll have to do almost every kind of job on this farm." "I understand," said Roz. "We've had auto machines for ages," Mr. Sharif went on, "but we didn't need a robot until my wife died." Those last words hung in the air for a while. The silence was finally broken by a low rumble of thunder. A storm was approaching. Tornado season was still months away, but in farm country, any storm could become dangerous. "Let's go home," said Mr. Sharif. Rambler started its engine and drove back up the long driveway. By the time they reached the farm buildings, a steady rain was falling, and the cows were in the barn. "This is for you," said Mr. Sharif, and he handed Roz her own computer. "That controls the farm's equipment, and it's got all the information you need to work here. Do you know how to use a computer?" "Yes, I know how to use a computer." Roz had never used a computer before, but she instinctively knew what to do. Clearly, the robot was designed to work with technology. "Study up tonight and start farming tomorrow," said Mr. Sharif. "You can stay in the machine shed with the other machines." "Perhaps I should stay in the barn with the cows," said Roz. "My whole world will revolve around them." The man smirked and he said, "I like the way you think, Roz." Chapter 6. The Monster. The cows were munching hay in the stalls when the big barn door slid open and a mechanical monster stomped in from the rain. The creature marched down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing through the carnivorous space until she found an empty corner, where she stood in the shadows as the storm began to rage outside. Everybody listened to the rain pouring and the wind howled and the thunder cracked. By midnight, the storm had blown over and there was only a gentle sprinkling on the roof. But the herd couldn't rest with the monster lurking in the corner. Cows began mooing to each other. "What is that monster doing? She hasn't moved in hours. I bet she's waiting to eat us in her sleep." The cows gasped at the horrible thought. And then an old cow named Annabelle tried to calm down the herd. "Relax, everybody," she said. "There are monsters like this at my last farm, and they never ate cows. Come to think of it, they never ate anything at all. If this monster has never eaten anything at all, she must be awfully hungry by now," said a cow named Tess. "I saw the farmer driving the monster around in his truck," said a calf named Lily. "I don't think he would have done that if she were dangerous." Nobody knew quite what to think of the strange creature in their midst. "I think the monster is harmless. I think the monster is unnatural. I think the monster is moving." The herd fell silent as the monster marched out of the shadows and into the middle of the barn. And then the monster did the impossible. She did the unthinkable. She spoke to the cows in the language of the animals. "I am not a monster. I am a robot. My name is Roz." Chapter 7. The Robot Story. None of the cows could believe that the monster, this robot, this machine, had just spoken to them in the animal language. They stared at her, nervously shifting in their stalls, wondering what she would do next. What Roz did next was simple. She told the truth. She stood in the middle of the barn and she shared her story with the herd. "I spent my first year of my life on a remote wild island," Roz began. I did not know how I got there. I only knew that I wanted to survive. So I studied the island animals to see how they survived, and a surprising thing happened. Their sounds and movements started making sense to me. I was learning the language of the animals. Even when I could speak to them, the animals wanted nothing to do with me. But that changed when I discovered an orphaned gosling. The poor little thing would have died on its own, so I cared for him and adopted him as my son. His name is Brightbill. The murmur spread through the herd. When the animals saw me caring for Brightbill, they finally accepted me. I was no longer alone. I had friends and family and a home. Life was good. Until the Recco robots arrived. They came in with their sleek white airship to take me away. When I resisted, they became violent. The animals defended me. They fought bravely and destroyed the Reccos, but I was badly damaged in the fighting. I needed repairs, and I could not get them on the island, so the animals loaded my broken body into an airship and took me far away from my home. Lily the calf poked her head through the railing and said, "What about Brightbill?" "My son is very smart and tough, and he has a good flock," said Roz. "I think he will be okay without me." "Where were you taken?" said Tess. "I was taken back to the factory where I was made. The factory is run by a crew of robot workers called the Makers. When I arrived, they put me in a room filled with other broken robots. Some robots were completely ruined, and the Makers immediately sent them away, but those of us with working computer brains were given a test. What kind of test? Asked Lily. The makers simply asked us questions. They asked us how we had become damaged. They asked us how we would respond to different emergencies. They asked us to identify certain sounds and smells and objects. Robots who answered every question correctly were repaired. All others were destroyed. In the wilderness, I camouflaged my body to survive. In the robot factory, I camouflaged my personality to survive. I pretended to be perfectly normal robot. I did not say that I had adopted a goose, or that I could speak with animals, or that I had resisted the Reccos. I said what I had to say to pass the test, and it worked. Good for you, Roz, shouted Tess, and the other cows smiled. The makers shut me off, and when I woke, my body was fixed, and I was on this farm. Now, like all of you, I belong to Mr. Sharif. The cows stopped smiling. Everyone was quiet. And then Annabelle spoke up. I was taken from my friends and family too, she said. They're back on the farm where I was born. I still think about them every day. It is difficult to be apart from your loved ones, said the robot. And you know, Roz, things could be worse, said Tess. At least on this farm, you're still surrounded by nature. Yes, things could be worse. The robot's eyes brightened a little. But I am not safe here. If any human ever learns who I really am, they will have me destroyed. And that is why, when the time is right, I will try to escape. So our question of the day, like I said in the beginning, how do you think Roz feels being in a new place? Why? And your sentence frame that you can start with is, I think Roz feels, and then tell us a feeling word, because. Make sure you start with a capital and finish with a period at the end. Roz is capitalized because it's her name, so don't forget to do that as well. I'm proud of you for listening. Please keep working hard. Please keep yourself busy, and I look forward to reading your responses. Talk to you later, kids.